All right, ready to dive into a case that truly shook the French justice system, the Outreau affair. You've brought us quite the story, and from what I've read, the implications are, well, they're still felt today.
Yeah, it's a case that, it started small. Like we're talking a quiet coastal town, Outreau, France. But this thing, it's spiraled. It became a national reckoning. Between 1997 and 2000, these allegations, and they were horrific, of child sexual abuse emerged. And ultimately, it was 17 individuals caught in this legal, I don't even know, a legal web.
17 people.
17.
And from what I've read, these accusations, I mean, they were incredibly disturbing. And the sheer scale, the alleged abuse, it's like it sent shockwaves like through this entire community, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. We're talking 12 children identified as victims, and the accusations, they were graphic. They painted a picture of just horrific acts, and this wasn't just some local news story. I mean, this gripped the nation. And it brought up these profound questions about justice, about accountability, and really about the limits of any legal system, when you're dealing with something like this.
So let's rewind. Okay, let's go back to 2004 when this finally lands in the courtroom, Saint-Omer courtroom. Can you even imagine that pressure? Everyone involved, the weight of these accusations, the media, like just all eyes on them, the lives just hanging in the balance.
It's almost unimaginable. The atmosphere in the courtroom, it was electric, just this palpable sense of tension, this anticipation. And at the heart of it all were the children, right? Yeah. Their testimonies. Because often in these types of cases, that's the most compelling evidence you have.
But that's where things get really, really complicated, right?
Yeah.
Because from what I understand, the children's testimonies were, well, inconsistent. That's putting it mildly.
Yeah. And this is where things get really difficult because you have child psychology, right? And you have the legal process, and they collide in this really uncomfortable way. See, getting reliable testimony from children, especially in a case with this level of trauma, it requires specialized techniques. I mean, the interviewers need to be trained to avoid leading questions, any kind of coercion, because even subtle cues, even just a tone of voice, it can influence a child's recollection. It can.
And which, from my understanding, that wasn't always the case in Outreau.
Unfortunately, no, it wasn't. See, the Parliamentary Commission, they were tasked with investigating this whole thing. And later, they uncovered this over-reliance on the children's testimonies. And not only that, there were potential biases in the methods. Some of the police, some of the psychologists involved, the methods they were using, they just weren't, they weren't sound. It really shows you how, even with the best intentions, even when everyone's trying to do the right thing, the pursuit of justice, I mean, it's fraught with human error. It really is.
It's heartbreaking. It really is. You have this small community, and they're dealing with just unimaginable accusations. You have a legal system that, frankly, just seems ill-equipped to even handle something this complex, something this sensitive, especially when it comes to these testimonies, these children's testimonies. And at the center of it all, you have these children, and they are caught. They're caught in the middle of this storm.
And it's a reminder, a very real reminder, that justice, I mean, it's a process. And in this case, it was a flawed one, deeply flawed. Because this story, it doesn't end in that courtroom in Saint-Omer. This case, with all its messiness, all the controversy, it moves to the national stage. It lands in the Court of Appeal in Paris, 2005.
And that's when everything changes, right? Like a complete 180 from those initial rulings.
Yeah, it was a complete shock. 13 of the 17 accused, acquitted by the Court of Appeal. Just let that sink in for a second. Years of their lives gone, their reputations tarnished, families torn apart. And for what? To be cleared, finally, officially cleared, but years later.
It's astounding. And it really highlights how heavy those initial accusations were, how long they're shadowed, even when they're proven unfounded.
Absolutely. The Outreau affair, it became a national scandal, a symbol of a justice system that had failed spectacularly. It showed everyone the human cost of these errors. And tragically, for one man, justice, it came too late. Francois Mormont, one of the accused, he died in prison, 2002, years before his name was ever cleared.
It's heartbreaking, really.
Mm-hmm.
His case, it's a stark reminder that when the system fails, when that presumption of innocence is gone, there can be real, irreversible consequences.
It really makes you think. And with these acquittals, right, echoing through the halls of justice, the media, which had been, they were all over those initial accusations, now they had to grapple with something else entirely. reporting on the system's failures, their own role in this whole thing, and public opinion, well, it shifted. It had to.
It's almost like there's this separate trial going on, right? In the court of public opinion, they had to re-examine, to judge right alongside the legal proceedings.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And to their credit, France, I mean, they didn't shy away from it, from those uncomfortable truths. They launched a parliamentary commission to really dig into this case, to understand how this miscarriage of justice, how could it even happen?
So they didn't just try to sweep it under the rug, just move on, pretend it never happened.
No, not at all. This commission, I mean, they were serious. Lawmakers, legal experts, social workers, they all came together and they produced a report, and it was scathing. It highlighted all these systemic issues within the French justice system.
Yeah.
And one key finding: judges, they were just ill-equipped to handle a case of this magnitude, this complexity, especially one that hinged so much on child testimony.
So, like, a lack of specialized training, maybe in child psychology, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And then there was the media pressure, right? That was another thing the commission uncovered. Remember the sensationalized headlines we talked about? Well, they weren't just reporting the news, they were shaping it, shaping public perception, maybe even influencing the trial itself. And the commission, they recognized that this was dangerous, this blurring of lines, because it threatened the whole idea of impartial justice.
So big findings, right? A nation trying to process this huge scandal. But was there any real accountability? Like, were individuals held responsible for their part in this?
Well, that's where things get a little complicated. See, the commission, they came up with all these reforms, right? Specialized training for judges so they could better understand child psychology and testimony, revised police procedures for interviewing children, even guidelines for how the media should cover these kinds of sensitive cases. But when it came to individual accountability, well, there wasn't much of it.
So no one was removed from their position? No disciplinary action? Nothing like that?
Yeah. There were apologies, of course, expressions of regret, but no one was held directly responsible for the mistakes, for this cascade of errors that led to this, well, this tragedy. And this lack of accountability, it sparked outrage, A lot of people in France felt betrayed by the system they thought they could trust. The Outreau affair, it became this touchstone, this chilling reminder that even in a nation built on liberty, equality, fraternity, justice, it's not guaranteed. It's not.
And that brings us to a really crucial point in this whole thing, doesn't it? It's not just about the individuals involved in this specific case, but the ripple effects. How this one case, this massive blunder, impacted child abuse reporting in the years that followed.
That's exactly right. The Outreau affair, it cast this long, unsettling shadow over child protection in France. It raised these really difficult questions about how you balance the need to protect children with the right to due process, the presumption of innocence. Both are vital, and yet they seem to be at odds in these cases.
It's like walking a tightrope, right? Trying to find that balance between protecting the vulnerable and making sure that the accusations are investigated thoroughly, fairly, without prejudice.
Exactly. And after Outreau, many people argue that the pendulum swung too far in the other direction.
Meaning, what happened? What were the consequences for the legal system, for French society as a whole? So we're talking about the aftermath, right? This huge scandal, this stain on the French justice system. What happened to actual child abuse cases? Were they impacted?
The numbers paint a pretty stark picture, actually. In the 10 years, the decade following the Outreau affair, convictions in child abuse cases, they plummeted 40%.
40%. That's a huge drop. So are we talking about like legitimate cases of abuse being dismissed, or maybe like not investigated thoroughly enough because of this one high-profile case, this Outreau mess?
It's the question, isn't it? The million-dollar question. The Outreau affair, it cast a long shadow. There was this fear, a real fear, both in the legal system, but also just among people in general, this fear of repeating those mistakes. Judges, they were hesitant to convict. Prosecutors, they were more cautious, much more cautious about bringing charges in the first place. There was this sense, and maybe it was unspoken, but it was there, that child abuse accusations, which, let's face it, were once just readily believed, they were now met with this, well, this skepticism.
So it's like this perfect storm, right? Because on the one hand, you have this incredibly real, this urgent need to protect children, to make sure that abusers are held accountable. But then on the other hand, you have this, well, this newfound awareness that, hey, false accusations happen, wrongful convictions happen. And the harm from that, from getting it wrong, It's irreparable.
Exactly. It's this tension and navigating it, finding that balance. Well, it became the challenge, the defining challenge, I think, for the French justice system after Outreau.
And what about the media in all this? I mean, we talked about those sensationalized headlines, the courtroom broadcasts, the way this story just captivated the whole nation. After Outrow, did they do any soul searching of their own?
They had to. The Outreau affair, it became this cautionary tale. I mean, they teach it in journalism schools now. It's a prime example of how the media, how they cover a story, how it can influence not just what people think, but even the judicial process itself. And that commission that investigated the case, they were really critical of the media. That need to sensationalize, to grab those headlines instead of just being, well, sensitive. They presented this very simple narrative when the reality, as we've seen, was far more complicated.
So did anything actually change? Did the media, like, as an institution, did they take any responsibility?
There was a shift, definitely, at least in how some outlets, how they approached these types of stories involving minors, especially allegations of abuse. They started using stricter guidelines, like protecting the identities of everyone involved, the accused and the accusers, avoiding language that could influence a jury, things like that. And just in general, trying to get multiple perspectives, different sides of the story before they ran with it, before they published or broadcast anything.
So a move toward, well, more responsible reporting, more ethical reporting, maybe.
You could say that, but it's a process. It's ongoing. It's always evolving. And the media landscape itself, it's changing constantly, especially now with social media. It's added a whole other layer to this.
It's almost like the Outreau affair. It forced France, the whole of French society, to really look in the mirror, to confront some really uncomfortable truths, not just about their justice system, but about their media, about, well, maybe even about themselves and their own biases. But were there any real tangible changes, like actual reforms? Did they learn from this?
That's the question, right? And the short answer, it's yes. There have been big changes. The French justice system, it's not the same as it was back then. Remember all those recommendations from that parliamentary commission? Well, a lot of them, they were put into practice. So now you have judges, prosecutors, police. They're getting more specialized training, especially when it comes to child psychology, how to interview someone who's experienced trauma, how to handle child testimony in a way that's, well, more reliable, more sensitive.
So less emphasis on those child testimonies, those potentially unreliable testimonies, and more focus on, like, finding evidence to back them up, building cases carefully, making sure at every step that the rights of everyone involved, they're protected.
Exactly. There's more awareness now of that presumption of innocence. They haven't forgotten about the victims, not at all, but they're trying to find that balance to make sure that in their pursuit of justice for those victims, they don't unjustly punish the accused. And the Outreau affair, as awful as it was, it forced that conversation to happen. And it's a conversation that's still going on today.
And it's not just a French conversation, is it? It's a human conversation, a global one. This idea of justice, of accountability, of what happens when we get it wrong, those are universal themes.
Without a doubt. The Outreau affair, it happened in France, yeah, but it's a story that resonates, that has lessons for all of us, no matter where we live. It reminds us that justice, it's not this perfect system. It's human and it's flawed. And it requires us to be vigilant, to be involved, to never stop questioning, to never stop demanding better.
It's a lot to think about. It really is. And for our listeners, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Outreau affair.
Wow.
We've just scratched the surface here, and there's so much more to explore. So if this piqued your interest, if this sparked something in you, please keep digging, keep learning.
I second that. There are books, articles, documentaries, even firsthand accounts from the people who lived through it. It's all out there.
And as we've seen today, sometimes the most important lessons, they aren't learned in the courtroom, but in those echoes, in how these cases, they shape our understanding of justice, of responsibility, of how we as a society, how we treat each other, how we strive to build a world where something like this, hopefully, never happens again. So until next time, keep asking those tough questions.